Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Canadian Rocketship Companies, where we profile Canadian startups who can help you accelerate your career. I'm your host, Alex Norman, and this week I'm joined by Eytan, co-founder and CEO of NorthOne. While we're recording this podcast, if you have any questions and you're watching live, you can just add a comment to your LinkedIn channel, YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and those questions will be fed into the show. So we love participation. If you're watching live, please feel free to ask a question. Let's get started. Let's get Eytan up on stage. Hey, Eytan. How you
Thanks for
doing?
having me. I'm
Oh,
doing great, thanks.
it's my pleasure. Are you in Toronto today?
I am. I'm in my
Yeah.
room.
Yeah. Well, it's lovely weather outside. It seems like it's nice thunderstorms. Before we starting into NorthOne, why don't you give everyone a 30 seconds background on what you did prior to founding NorthOne?
Yeah, look, before prior to NorthOne, I mean, I'm born and raised in Montreal. Did a JD MBA at McGill, and then went to work at McKinsey for about 6 years, and was very fortunate. It was just right time, right place. Spent a lot of my time there watching the emergence of fintech in Europe, and was trying to translate that into what it meant for big North American financial institutions. And part of that was what germinated, what eventually turned into NorthOne. The ideas just started percolating, and I was very fortunate that I got to see from a 10,000 foot view this massive trend that was not even making headlines yet, and then eventually kind of stopped it cold turkey and went right to starting to build NorthOne, which is what we're talking about today.
So want to get into NorthOne, but just a couple more questions about that background.
Sure.
So you studied JD MBA. Why go work at McKinsey? Like,
It was a matter of self-awareness. So I worked at a law firm. I loved it. They were great people, but I really did not love the work. And I found myself, I remember walking into one of the managing partner's offices, and I said, okay, like I finished my summer. I know where I want to focus. And like, everybody in the law firm is expecting is tax law, real estate law, like transactions, like what's the thing? I said, I want to open a new office for you. I want to poach new lawyers. I want to get new clients. I want to like find, and he just like laughed at me and he just said, look, Eytan, like, have you ever considered like management consulting or something on the business side? He's like, because you're going to have to spend 15 years of hard legal work before you get the keys to an existing office, let alone one that doesn't even exist. And I walked out of there, and on that way home, I just said, like, oh God, like I am thankfully that guy really just gave me like a nice dose of reality and never regretted. Moved on, spent some time at McKinsey, and found it was the most fantastic training ground for me to kind of figure out who I was as a professional.
so last question before we get to NorthOne.
Sure.
There's a lot of McKinsey alumni in the Canadian tech ecosystem. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm one. And if you go to the Valley, they sort of shit on consultants as founders. So, what do you think there's something special in Canada? Or do you think there's something that people understand about doing time as a consultant that helps you be a founder?
I mean, it depends. It's obviously relative. I remember when I was at McKinsey, there was a massive push on like how can you be entrepreneurial in your day to day. Like everything was focused on what can you do to be more autonomous, more entrepreneurial. So it was forcing me to think about these things, and it was natural for me. I wasn't thinking about it, relative to Canada, US. But what I have found is that a lot of people think of consulting as a black box. They don't really know. They say, okay, so I know there's a lot of like PowerPoint, a lot of thinking, and then they kind of look for a couple of tropes on like what does a consultant do, and possibly think of the worst experience they've had, and they say, I guess that's what you did. And especially when you're a very, when you've gone through a very technical upbringing, professionally, you don't have exposure to what really good third party support can look like sometimes. And I found that as I started emerging from McKinsey, I definitely came through a lot of people who said, oh, like what can you do, like what good is that to build a company? And it was just, I took that as like, great, I'll just my burden to prove it to you. But then you start realizing that there are a number of various companies across America. In fact, there's even a VC fund in Silicon Valley that is the only thesis is I will find ex McKinsey, ex BCG, and ex Goldman professionals who are now founding companies because I believe that they have a above average likelihood to succeed. And so it cuts both ways. But I think historically, most of McKinsey would exit the McKinsey life to a large corporate environment, right, which is almost anathema to the startup ethos of like starting with nothing. So I think they've just not had a lot of exposure to what good professionals like that can do.
Well, as I think in Canada, at least founders, there's NorthOne, you got Well Simple and you got ClearCo all have McKinsey alum
Yeah,
as founders, and that's without even really thinking. So let's get to NorthOne. For people that
sure.
don't know what NorthOne is, give us your elevator pitch.
Yeah, I mean, look, at NorthOne is a small business focused challenger banking platform, right? The parallel for Canada is think of Coho, but for business, right? But we serve only the American market. So we serve small businesses across America. And what we do is we provide them, I mean, the basics, of course, right? So all the operational banking needs that a business would use over the course of its day to day, checking account, a debit card, the ability to deposit checks remotely, the ability to have checks remotely written and mailed on your behalf, wires. I mean, you name it, right? Everything, cash deposits, cash withdrawals. But that's actually I think the necessary but not sufficient reason for why NorthOne needs to exist. I mean, I would say like the world doesn't need another bank. That's not like no one's saying, geez, we just don't have enough of these. But really, what NorthOne, the whole magic behind it is that we're actually solving an important problem, which is that 80% of small business failure in America, at the very least, is due to cash flow mismanagement issues. It's really that people become professionals. They try to commercialize that in a business, and they never realize that as a 7 at night, you become an accountant, a payroll manager, an invoice collector, a receivables professional, and they're not prepared. And their inability to juggle all those balls leads to failure. And if you think of the cost of that failure, I mean, that's just not like statistics. These are generational wealth of families evaporating, families with food insecurity. So actually being able to lower the risk of running a business by providing more autopilot to the financial management life of a small business owner is where NorthOne comes. And our thesis at the core of it is that the best way to do that, the best way to kind of build the finance department in every small business in America is actually through the bank account and the bank platform. That is like the core, the nerve center of all things money. And so let's build the finance department around that and serve it in a way where we start actually de-risking the operations of that business for the owners without them having to actually think about it, reduce the cognitive load to get that same amount of work done. By being just thoughtful about the design, the architecture, and the purpose of what this new banking offering is for our customers, what role it plays in their life.
So I love that your hypothesis here is hey, lots of people know how to run a business, but they're not CFOs. They're not accountants, and it's a burden. So we'll give them the superpowers to do that for them, or make it easier for them.
Yeah.
When you launched, I know you went and interviewed, hundreds of small business owners. So why'd you do that, and how does this inform what NorthOne became or has become?
By the way, this is totally from my training at McKinsey, which really came to say, look, don't assume you know the answer. Don't use first principles to figure out how to solve a real life problem. Talk to the experts. And in my mind, the experts around the problem about small business financial management, the pain points, was to go talk to, I think I'd spoken to 100 small business owners across the continent before I even had a name for the company. And it's very awkward conversations, right? I didn't even know what I was building yet. And I still am finding ways to get 30 minutes of someone's time. But it was really about, what keeps you up at night? And if they didn't say something related to money, financial management, or banking in the first 3 things on their list, I said, great, thank you so much. I don't want to take more of your time up. Because if it's not a top 3 concern, it is really not going to be easy to sell them something that is, not easy to get it started with. And that informed it forms not only just our hypotheses on product, go to market, et cetera, but it helped us understand, how do our customers think about their banking products, right? For most of them, they think about them as like a socket in the wall. Like, I don't care who my utility is. Like, I get the electricity, I plug in, I need it to run my business. Same thing for a bank account. Like, look, I have a bank account, just keeps the money safe, and I just use it to run my business. They never even thought that there could be so much more in that relationship that you have with your bank. And so that was part of what we realized, that the challenge for us was not just the technical one, can you build the thing, but it was educational. Can you convince people or even persuade them to rethink the relationship they have with their banking tools? It's not simply a store of value and a way to move money, but if could actually go into the back end of your business, the finance department, and start removing a lot of the busy work that you just assumed was part of life. That was actually a really important piece. And I'll just add one other, it informs a lot of the DNA of our company. Everybody, for the longest time, one of your initial pieces of onboarding was to interview a small business owner and present it to the rest of the team. And at a certain point, a certain scale, that became really difficult because it just was a lot of people's time and anxiety creating, like, how do I find a business owner? But now we actually have we invested in a research team. And part of what you do is you watch them research a business owner. And it's such a great way to stay humbled. Like I regularly, when they let me, I'll volunteer to be the note taker, because it really forces you to be an active listener in people who are exactly those people out there who you're hoping to help. And you have to be able to make your case, as opposed to kind of, forcing them to pay attention. You got to earn that attention.
Excellent. I love that. And so it sounds now you have a research department, so you probably do less interviews yourself, or the team does less interviews directly.
So I listen to the recordings. It gets
Yeah.
actually weird. Some people listen to podcasts at night. I go on jogs and I listen to like interview recordings of small business owners with our team. But we have that because now you can actually professionalize it with people who, people who have rigorous thoughtfulness around question structure and how to use follow-ups and how to hypothesis test ideas to an interview. That is way beyond my capabilities. I was asking very broad questions, and it's amazing to just see the level of sophistication around our ability to really probe into customers' lives and then marry that to data that we collect from them as well.
I love that. And it sounds like, you hear about customer development when you read about startups, but it sounds like you lived it, and research has become core to what NorthOne does.
So there's this book, Alex, called now it's called the Startup Owner's Manual. It used to be called the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which is this guy, Steve Blank. And I have a copy that I bought because they stopped publishing 4 Steps. They turned it into something else. They turned it into the Startup Owner's Manual. And I have a copy of it with dog ears on every page and highlighter and post-it notes. It fell apart on me because I'd go to every interview and I just work on it. But I was fortunate. Someone put together a textbook on how to immerse yourself in your customers. Like I could actually tell them what they needed before they'd even say it. So like I recognize the patterns, like I get where they're coming from. And that helped me give a lot of direction and early thoughtfulness on the product, on go-to-market, on value proposition, because it's almost like an anthropological study of small business owners. It was actually quite helpful, and I was fortunate that I got the time to do that.
I love that. And then one thing you mentioned is, hey, you're serving American customers. You're based in Canada, so was one of the things that you learned from this interview process, let's go tackle the States first, or why focus on the US instead of Canada?
So we always had the idea that this is a North American problem that we know quite well. Like it was very clear that the problems were fairly universal across the world, but at least, we're situated in North America. Let's probably solve it somewhere in our backyard first, and then see if we can take it elsewhere. And we tried. I mean, the early days, part of our thesis was maybe we can do this for Canadians first. And I spent about 2 years and possibly almost ran the company into the ground trying to force the launch of something like this in Canada. And the system wasn't ready. We couldn't find the right infrastructure, the right kind of daisy chain of partnerships that allow you to offer the kind of experience that anybody, in this day and age would expect. Like you think things should be real time. You think things should feel a little magical when you're using a new product. It's one thing to say, I get it. It's a 100-year-old bank. It's going to be a little, a little frustrating to use. But if it's a fintech, the assumption is that this should be digitally beautiful and immersive. And we could not get that kind of technologies, infrastructure through the banking system in Canada. I think today things might have changed. Like I see people doing it. I'm actually cheering them on. I've spoken to people who are trying to do this today. And I was like, I am your greatest cheerleader. Like I want this to be successful. And so, realizing that it wasn't ready. The soil wasn't fertile for this idea we had. We said, look, the next immediate thought we always had was like, it's going to be an American company too. And we went and found that the American landscape was very ready for this kind of an offering. In fact, not only from an infrastructure point of view, but there's a tradition there. There's 4,000 banking institutions in America. People regularly think, well, I'll just take my business elsewhere. Yeah. Like you come from Canada and the thought of like switching banks, it's rare that you do it out of anger, right? I mean, like maybe that's the reason, but it's not a common thing. Like you kind of just stick it out saying, okay, well, I mean, if I get a mortgage with this bank, I guess I'll move my bank account there. Like that's the big question that you have. Whereas there, they say, I don't like the service. I'm going to go to this other bank. There's thousands of you. I don't have to bother. And that just little tiny little change in mindset is exactly what a fintech like us needs. That is your little permission to say, well, consider us. Because if you're thinking of switching as a going concern, then consider this new offering because we can do a better job. And that is all the oxygen you need. And so you have the infrastructure, you have the kind of customer mindset that wants better value. and is used to going to get it. Canadians absolutely want better value, but I don't think we have a tradition of like quickly switching things here when we don't get it.
So
A lot of us think of it in a long term, like over the course of 10 years, maybe I'll switch something. And there it's every little while you'll see a customer saying, couldn't take my business to where I want to.
so the
And that
States
was
was
actually
a
quite helpful
more conducive system, more partners, the
at the
mentality is
time.
different at the
At the
time.
time. And I think that if people can offer these kind of things to Canadians today, I think Canadians want value just like anyone else. I think there's a receptive audience, but you have to have a whole ecosystem. You have to have the infrastructure, you have to have the regulatory context, and the consumers all ready for this kind of a thing to emerge, or you don't pass go and you don't collect $200.
So you
It doesn't
launched in
go
the
far.
States.
Mhm.
How do you know you had product market fit, or when did you know this was working?
So at the beginning, we launched with 100,000 businesses that had requested a NorthOne account before we ever launched it. And that was the best proxy we could get for product market fit. You can't, until you have the product, you're guessing. But we had some strong hypotheses on what was driving those signups, where they were coming from. And then when we launched, honestly, it was we had to go as wide as possible in terms of like getting the bank account in front of people, because we had hypotheses like, I think this is the kind of person who will want this most, but like hypotheses are meant to be disproven. So we tried to say, yeah, definitely, try to find our core customers to use NorthOne, which we thought was going to be main street businesses who are digitally adept. But let's try it out on gig economy, startups, let's try like all sorts of businesses. And that actually allowed us to see what was sticking. And so we actually got schooled, like the market schooled us, say, oh, we really didn't think that this, like we thought for sure early digital natives were going to be like
Yeah.
grabbing a digital banking product. And we found that like, yeah, they were there, but the people who were absolutely hand over fist trying to get into it was people who were in places where the banking system was starting to fade away, in rural areas where branches were closing, in parts of cities where it just wasn't easy to find a bank branch. These people had the most raw version of the problem, saying, I have a business idea, or I have a business, and it is now taking me an hour to drive to a branch to deposit a $300 check. How is that normal? Bring the bank to me. And we were able to realize like this is the rawest form of the problem. And so we drove to it. And then when we started kind of almost A/B testing our customer hypotheses, those that we saw the most love, statistically, we saw the best uptick in terms of retention, in terms of monetization, in terms of even referrals, the number of referrals per customer with those folks who are using it. And all these things started lining up. We said, okay, this is where we have the best form of product market fit. But I'll say, Alex, the real thing that took me for a spin was actually realizing what product market fit meant in my context. One version of it is Twitter circa 2009, where you've never seen this before. No one knows if there's a room for it in the universe. And
Yeah.
you're truly finding like 0 to 1 product market fit. But then there's the translation coefficient, which by the way took me time to figure out, was that we're at the core of it, we're offering, there's a bank account here, it's a debit card. These are things that we know have a place in the world, like they're used universally. So the question is not like, is there a role for the bank account in the life of a business? It was actually kind of a more nuanced saying, is the way in which we've expressed this and the value proposition, the communication, the product, the design aligning to a type of customer, does that create a product market fit, which I would call, that is going to be strong enough to rip people out of existing banking relationships and bring them to us. And as soon as I kind of changed my thought around what product market fit would mean for NorthOne, it actually reduced the degree of experimentation we need to do. So we said, let's not, we know that an FDIC insured account is going to be fine. Now we got to focus on, things further, built upon that, and that's product market fit. At least in fintech, where you're
Yeah.
finding a different way to express something that people have used for many years.
It sounds like the difference, the way I'd express is Twitter is like, is there a need for this in the world? Versus yours is there a need for our take on this and who are
Our
our
expression of
customers?
it. Exactly.
And then so speed me up to, where are you guys now? So you got product market fit, you're in the US. Just give us some high level, if description of where the company's at today.
Yeah, look, I mean, we're very fortunate. First of all, we've got an incredible team based in Toronto. We even have some Montrealers. We have an office in New York and San Francisco and Portland. And by the way, like if I think about offices, I mean, it's kind of almost like a yesterday's kind of way to think about where people are. I'd say 30 to 40% of our customers are outside of any metropolitan area. Our team is like kind of anywhere. After COVID, they just said, "Hey, I'm going to go work from the countryside from now on," and that was cool. But we just got an incredible group of folks who are just so dedicated to the mission. I think that's just been like the most inspiring thing for me to just see almost like you're finding your community out there in terms of your team, and we can all rally around this one thing that it, supporting small business might be one of the best things that we could do, to support, social equity, reducing income inequality, and improving, our generation's overall outcome in life. And in terms of customers, and we've got customers across all 50 states. Interestingly, we have customers in places we never really expected. Some of our biggest markets are the Deep South, Georgia, Louisiana, Arkansas. These are places that it's just amazing to see where people you would never kind of visualize when you're thinking about what a customer could look like. They're like, wow, someone in like, Baton Rouge is like using this, and they're writing in, and you're talking to them, and you realize like just the ability to have scale and impact across people's lives. The most inspiring things I get is to talk to our customers who are from walks of life that are so different from my own. It just gives you a sense of humility to say, wow, we really need to cherish the relationship we have with them, because we have really, life would not have led us to each other's paths. And now that we have each other, we've got to show them that we're there for their business. And more broadly, you're often there for the customer as an individual. People restart businesses when one fails. So you actually have to realize that in small business banking, yes, there's a life of the business, but when that person starts number 2 and 3, that's what the lifetime of a customer is. It's not simply when the corporate entity dissolves or not, when the person actually retires.
Yeah, so if someone could sell a business, so the business can fail. I love it. So it's providing a service for their entity they're working on, but then making them fulfilled that they come back again and again. So I guess one of the reasons we were doing this podcast is looking for opportunities for people to accelerate their career in tech. So
Sure.
Love that you talked about the mission. Why else should someone join NorthOne?
Look, I have 1,000 reasons, but I think
give me your top two.
Yeah, the top two. Number one is mission, right? If supporting small businesses and changing the way that they get to interact with their livelihood, the banking system, and also their likelihood of success is meaningful. That's a first really important step, because many places you can work hard, many places you can get professional development, etc. But if the mission makes sense to you, that's when the long hours don't feel as tough, because you're doing it for something that matters. And I think the second one is, we are very, very deliberate and thoughtful around putting together a team of people that you're like, if I'm in the trenches with these people, I look left, I look right, I know they've got my flanks. Like we will do anything. And so there's a degree of almost like chip off your shoulder, insane level of ambition. Like we want to eat the world, and we want to make sure that we are a championship winning team. And so it is so important for me that when people join the company, they look around, they're like, they're inspired, almost intimidated by the professionals we have. Because I certainly look at everybody at the company, I'm like, they are so incredible in their swim lane. But what better people to have as brothers and sisters in arms as we kind of like really try to change the landscape of small business for our lifetime.
So along with those high expectations of teammates, what makes someone successful at NorthOne? So someone joins, how do they know they're going to be successful?
Yeah. So I think the technical proficiency is kind of the gate opener, right? Like you have to be able to do the very thing that you're hired to do, whether it's development, design, customer support, etc. And that's got to be, we consider that to have to be within a distinctive range. But the mindset is actually what creates long-term success. It's about this degree of almost extreme ownership around your work. When you send an email, the job is not done. It's when it's been received and replied to that your job is done. That thoughtfulness, saying, I will make sure that this gets done. I own it. The idea that the comfort around the constant change, like our businesses change, right? And people who thrive on that, they love the idea that like next month might look so different to this month. It really is the kind of wave that they can surf well. And I think the last one is also the relentlessness of it. We are going up against the most well-funded companies in the world, like Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase. Like they essentially have infinity money for free when you're comparing them in contrast to, a startup. And so the way that we persist is by being relentless, by being, faster, more intentional. I think the last one is candor. We try to have a very politics-free culture, and that's not for everybody. We will give direct feedback. We want people to know that you assume good intentions whenever you receive and give, feedback, either personally, professionally, whatever it might be. And that's actually been a really helpful thing, because it allows us just to remove a layer of administration on how we talk to each other. We can just be really direct. And I know that that's not everybody's cup of tea. It's not easy to work in a very direct environment, but it's the only one that we can. The only advantage we have over the biggest banks is that we can get the message across the team quicker. We can make quicker decisions. And I think politics, the way that you think about it, often gets in the way of a quick decision cycle.
Yeah, people worry about winning and losing versus for themselves versus for the company.
Posturing, etc. And that rawness that we have, we'll try to preserve that as long as possible, because it's such an important piece of how we get to win.
And what roles are you currently hiring for?
There's a whole bunch. Software development, compliance, customer support, design, social media, brand strategy. Across the board, you name it. There's no shortage of things that we need incredible people to help us with.
So if someone wants to find out what those roles are, where do they go?
NorthOne.com. You see the career section, and they're all there.
And once they apply, what's the process like? What can they expect? Is this like a McKinsey 4 interviews, case studies, or
not necessarily? It changes by the role. And so you typically, you offer up your candidacy, and every single resume or cover letter, whatever it may be, is reviewed by our talent team. We certainly look at every single one and take that responsibility very seriously. And then depending on whether or not, the fit might work, we actually go to an intro call with our talent team, where they kind of get the basics of it. And then you typically move to what is kind of more along the lines of your subject matter expertise. If you're customer care, you'll start going down that process. And we have different ways that we test for whether people have the intrinsics or the knowledge base to succeed. And overwhelmingly, we get to the last stage, which is almost like a round robin with people at the company. Talk about the person. They start meeting people in short format to say 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there with various people after the core interview. And the reason for that is the best way to make sure that people feel comfortable is to reduce information asymmetry. Meet more people at the company. Don't you meet 2 people in your whole hiring process. You realize there's like a whole bunch of others and you're not really feeling it. It's a great way for us to better triangulate, and for the candidate to say, hey, I've only liked what I've seen, or I've not liked it at all. And the greatest gift sometimes that a candidate can give us is to actually say, this is not the right place for me. Great. Like that, there's no better way to save all of us time and energy and almost like emotion around someone who's not set up for success. And by the way, we get it wrong. Like, we're not perfect at it, of course. But likewise, when you start feeling that mutual conviction, it's a great feeling. And then you get to meet them and work with them. There's no better feeling than seeing someone honestly be like Michael Jordan on the basketball court and just dunk in their job. Like that is like my greatest reward in the world, when I get to see people on the team like that.
So I hope you have a lot of Michael Jordans on your team. One final question. What is the one question you wish more candidates asked during the interview process? So they're going through this round robin. What's the one question you wish you saw more often?
I mean, when it's honestly, I wish people would ask us, like, how do you guys pitch the company? How do you guys, speak for the company? And I love it when someone says, like, Eytan, how do you pitch this to an investor? Not because they are investors, but they want to know, like, how do we articulate ourselves to the rest of the world in a non-hiring dimension? That's a really, I think that's a really thoughtful one. And the other one is when people ask us about really thoughtful questions around, like, the rate of change. How much does the job, that shows that they're thinking about what it means to be an early stage. It doesn't mean you have to ask that, but when they do, it gives you a sense of comfort that this person understands that change is coming. And by the way, one of my first onboarding sessions I have with every new hire is where I say, like, we are not a museum. What worked yesterday almost certainly won't work in a few more months. And so we have to almost be ready to completely drop the playbook and rebuild it when we need. And that's part of this journey. And if change is a tough thing, there's so many incredible scaled companies that are, have a slightly different view of that. But in our case, It's our secret weapon. Our secret weapon is that we can
Yeah.
change quickly, and the team can kind of on a dime be like, yep, we're going to kind of figure things out in a different way, and we'll preserve that as much as we can.
So Eytan, I love that last set of questions people can ask, and thank you so much for spending the time with us. I have a feeling we'll talk more about NorthOne and have future conversations going forward.
Yeah, I look
And
forward to it.
Thanks for taking the time today.
It was a real pleasure, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the TechTO newsletter. The TechTO newsletter is a great way to stay informed of what is going on in the Canadian tech ecosystem. We cover everything from company news to career advice to great events like this. If you are around on Wednesday, July 28th, we're going to have our next TechTO Talent. It's going to be another opportunity to learn about great opportunities and how to manage your career in Canadian tech. We're going to have Luke Galea, VP of Engineering at 7Shifts, and Jonathan Klein, Chief Technology Officer at Coho, talk about how to manage your career today. Head over to techto.org for registration on all our upcoming events. Finally, if you're in the Toronto area, we're going back to doing our first in-person event in over 12 months. We're going to have a patio dinner on August 9th, where we're going to get a few special guests to come do firesides, and we're going to have a chance to interact with the community. Those guests include Arati Sharma from Shopify, formerly from Shopify, John Ruffalo, and Zach from Lupio. Please check out our website, techto.org, for more information on that. Finally, if you missed any of our previous episodes, head over to Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts to catch up on the previous conversations. Thank you and have a great day.